Paada politics and the government's yahapaalanaya reality check. That's the topic that we are going to talk about here. Now, this is not the first Paada that has been held in this country, and probably won't be the last. And some people have said, Paada or long marches don't necessarily result in governments being overthrown overnight or anything like that. However, whatever the rhetoric is of the organizers of these kinds of demonstrations and marches. But what we can talk about is what is this all about now? Is it about, as some people have said, it's about trying to a whole bunch of idiots who are supporting a bunch of crooks, right? And their objectives of the crooks is, some of the government spokesmen have said, is to capture power, because in case something happens in the courts, they can get out of jail. But that may be one reason. Then some people say this is an anti-government, it's against corruption, it's against the cost of living, it's against the actions of the government that are seen to be against the country's national interest. Some people have said that it is Sinhala Buddhist nationalism's expression and so on. But we don't know anything. You can talk about that if you like, but essentially it is a show of force. Because in power politics, what matters is how it impacts the balance of power. Ideological and other kinds of issues that are brought up are essentially frills, right? So what happened during the Paada and at the end of it is, from the point of view of the people who participated and the organizers, a show of force. It was clearly established where the supporters of the Sri Lanka, the majority of the supporters of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, where they stand on one side. And on the other side, we have to check how it impacted the rest. It impacted the government. As we all know, the government is still strong, it is still in power. No one has resigned, no one has called for elections or anything like that, nothing drastic has happened. However, the response has indicated that all is not well with the government. Because if this government was about yahapaalanaya or good governance, then the election pledges were about doing things in a different kind of way than the previous regime did. That there will be democracy, there will be space for dissent, and that will be tolerated. And that was the initial statement that came from the government, at least from the United National Party, that we are affirming the democratic right of people to demonstrate, which is what was promised in the election. Regardless of whether they are angry with us or not, we will give that space. However, it went downhill thereafter, partly because of the statements that have been made, and partly in the way that the government acted in a very childish kind of way. We saw court orders being sought. We saw, the Hyde Park, which was supposed to be where the final rally was to be held, being dug up. Now, that is the kind of thing that one expected and saw from the previous government. Not only Mahinda Rajapaksa, but governments right along, way back over several decades, we have seen that kind of very petty and actions which run counter to the whole spirit of democracy that was going to be ushered in by the yahapaalanaya administration. But most serious is the fact that state media, especially the Roopwahini, was used to rubbish the certain, what was it called, the Paada. And if you want to give coverage, you give coverage, proper coverage. You can bring in some commentary which covers the full range of opinions, or else you do what Mahinda did. What we saw was a kind of a Mahindaization of the yahapaalanaya administration. If you do things the way Mahinda did, you can't be talking about yahapaalanaya thereafter. You are just saying we are doing it, not Mahinda, but we are doing the same thing. So what is the message that gives to all the people who actually believe that this government will do things differently, that this is actually going to be a venasa or a change in a real practical sense, where the law and order there is no political interference in those processes, where state media is not abused for narrow political ends and so on. That we didn't see. We saw a very selective and coverage of the Paada yatra and a promotion of a whole caricature. It was caricatured, much like what we have seen in towards the last stages of the previous regime, where any action by the government, by the then opposition, was rubbished in this manner. Also, we have to talk about when you're talking about the politics and the power balance. We have seen that we can come to this conclusion. I would kind of offer this conclusion that one of the objectives of any opposition, whether it's a joint opposition or some other official opposition or an unofficial opposition, is to gather the anti-government sentiment in the country, right? For whatever reason, whether it's the cost of living or whether people who believe that this government is selling the country to India or China or the United States or whatever, or trying to give federalism or promote separatism or whatever. The anti-government sentiment, gathering of that anti-government sentiment does not necessarily translate into an overthrowing of a regime. But for any opposition worth its name, that's a non-negotiable. You got to try to do it. And here, Mahinda Rajapaksa's under his leadership and his inner circle, let's call it, they have managed to gather that. They have, whether how long they can maintain that, whether it was too early is a different matter. But at this political moment, the opposition to this government among the people seems to have rallied round Mahinda Rajapaksa, whether we like it or not. Whether Mahinda Rajapaksa uses that anti-government sentiment for his own personal purposes, objectives, to secure those, that's a different matter. That may or may not be the case, but when we are reading the power equation, when we are talking about the balance of power, at this particular moment in the country, it can clearly be stated that, well, a significant, if you want to be very conservative about it, a significant portion of the anti-government sentiment is with Mahinda Rajapaksa. What that does to the parliament, whether it will translate into a kind of a shift in a real sense in parliament, where the joint opposition has the numbers to be the official opposition, that's a different matter. We don't know about that. We can't really talk about it. What happens on the streets doesn't automatically get translated into the balance of power within parliament, where there's different set of laws, different dynamic, different logic that works in that institution. So that is where we stand in terms of, but the most disturbing thing is the fact that the government seems to have violated its own pledges regarding good governance. When we saw this in the way it has behaved in response, so someone can say they should be concerned. Just 1.5 years into power, after the so-called Rainbow Revolution of January 2015, less than 1 year after the general election victory of the United National Party and this formation of the unity government, such numbers turning up to voice objection is something for concern. It's no need to panic about it, but the response shows panic. Why they should panic, only they will probably know. But the way that the panic translated into action is disturbing in terms of the pledges of the new government. The election pledges. That is something that people should be alert to and maybe even worried about. Because if it is about bringing to power people we like, people whose names we know, people whose parties we identify with, then it's a different matter. But if people voted for this government to do things differently, then it's a very disturbing sign, considering that it's only 1.5 years after this change happened.
asianmirror.lk